These days, there are many places that people can get their news. There's always the big names Fox, NBC, CBS, ABC, and CNN. The printing press always has a place in our world and features titles such as the New York Times, Washington Post, and the Wall Street Journal. And independent voices and semi-independent voices are on the rise. We have sites like Daily Wire, Subverse, and Breitbart that are considered to be verified news sources. And freedomscoop.com aspires to be added to this list of verified sources. But occasionally, a smaller website will break a story that we should be outraged by, but the mainstreams largely ignore. On Sunday, the Times of America, a small news website attached to an Instagram account, announced that McConnell was firing back against court packing on a unified front. The account has seemed incendiary in the past, so I often take it with a grain of salt, but this story piqued my interest, so I decided to vet it, see what was going on with it, and see what the real story was behind it. Now, this is an extension of an older story that goes all the way back to the shootings in Dayton and El Paso, and if we remember all the way back then, all of the presidential candidates in the wake of this shooting decided to come out with radical gun control legislation, but according to CNBC, Senator Gillibrand has diagnosed the problem. To quote, "But one contender, Senator Kirsten Gillibrand, has diagnosed the problem as part of an industrial strength influence campaign from conservative advocacy groups on the Republican-appointed justices of the Supreme Court and is making the arguments to the judges themselves." The criticism came in the wake of a document penned by Rhode Island Senator Sheldon Whitehouse to the Supreme Court, and Gillibrand herself actually signed on to the document. In response to the Supreme Court hearing a case between a firearm advocacy group and the City of New York, Whitehouse, Gillibrand, and others wrote a scathing brief to the highest court in the land. It was a move to dismiss the case without hearing it at all. The brief, however, moved straight into laying several accusations against the presumed conservative bias of the court and the gun lobby that supposedly controls them. I'm not going to sit and read the entire brief. It is linked in the description below, but let's take a look at some of the highlight reel. One of the statements in this brief that I find most entertaining comes right at the beginning. Whitehouse writes, "The rationale for this long-settled principle is simple. This court is not a legislature. It can be tempting for judges to confuse their own preferences with the requirements of the law and to legislate political outcomes from the bench. But a judge is not a knight-errant roaming at will in a pursuit of his own ideal of beauty or of goodness." Which I find very ironic given the fact that the Democrat Party has been trying to legislate from the Supreme Court for 50 years. Let's read on. NRA spokespersons were similarly blunt. The NRA strongly supports Judge Brett Kavanaugh's confirmation to the U.S. Supreme Court because he will protect our constitutional rights to keep and bear arms. It's critical that all pro-Second Amendment voters urge their senators to confirm Judge Kavanaugh. And finally, the whole document ended in a thinly veiled threat to restructure the court for the will of the people. Let's read. "The Supreme Court is not well, and the people know it. Perhaps the court can heal itself before the public demands it be restructured in order to reduce the influence of politics. Particularly on the urgent issue of gun control, a nation desperately needs it to heal." The story of the Friend of the Court brief is almost a month old at this point, but it has come back to prominence because last week Senate Republicans stood together on a united front to respond and condemn the brief. In a letter to the clerk of the Supreme Court, the Republicans in the Senate condemned the brief put out by their left-leaning colleagues. McConnell even rips the veil off of the threat. On August 12th, several of our Democrat colleagues filed a brief amicus curiae in support of the City of New York, urging the court to dismiss the case as moot under Article 3 of the Constitution. We, of course, have no problem with senators submitting amicus briefs. Many of us have done so. But our colleagues did more than raise legal arguments in favor of mootness. They openly threatened this court with political retribution if it failed to dismiss the petition as moot. The brief's final paragraph warned, in which McConnell then quoted the quote that we just heard. He closes the paragraph by saying, "The implication is as plain as day. Dismiss this case or we'll pack the court." While the idea of court packing has been rumored since Scalia died, and especially since Trump took off in the polls, this brief represents a documented threat to follow through with it. It also represents a pattern we've seen especially since that fateful November day. Abolish the Electoral College, abolish or restructure the Senate, lower the voting age. It seems that if Democrats can't win by the rules that are laid out in front of them, the first place they go is to change the rules. While the Republican Party has been known for caving and capitulating in the past, Cocaine Mitch and his Senate Republicans close out this letter with one simple promise to the American people. For our part, we promise this. While we remain members of this body, the Democrats' threat to restructure the court is an empty one. We share Justice Ginsburg's view that 9 seems to be a good number, and it will remain that way as long as we are here. What do you think about the concept of court packing, and what do you think about the brief and the response that came about from it? I always welcome a thoughtful and positive discussion in the comment section below, and especially over on Twitter. That is at EdsBlog Twitter with a 1 in place of the I. Thanks as always for listening to this show and supporting this channel. And remember, never take the words of bloggers, podcasters, or journalists as gospel. Find all the facts and draw your own conclusions. Take care.
You're always there for me in my best hiding place. I'm not alone.